Well, as I said 1 week ago tonight, we were beginning Kol Nidre and Yom Kippur, which was also Shabbat, and it is the Shabbatot, the Sabbath of Sabbaths, when Yom Kippur falls on a Shabbat. And it was, I know, for many of us, a time of real soul-searching and thinking and reflecting, with the hopes when we broke the fast that the world would change just a little bit, that the planet would go just a tiny bit more back on track. And then Sunday night happened. And like many of you, I thought to myself, oh no, here we go again. And it's fitting that this week on Sukkot, we read from the Torah portion for Chol HaMoed that contains the story of a very similar crisis of faith that many of us may be having as Americans and as citizens of the world, and of course as Jews on the Shabbat after tragedy struck in Las Vegas last weekend. Because crises of faith are not limited to just ourselves, but we're part of the biblical narrative as well, and part of the experience, as it turns out, of Moses. Because Moses, having schlepped the people, which was not easy, from Egypt to Sinai, goes up to the mountain, and we know the story, comes back down from the mountain with tablets, excited to share the word of God with the people, and they do this horrible, terrible, abominable thing in building the golden calf. And Moses himself loses faith in the moments following. God wants to kill everybody, and Moses has to actually intervene. And so tomorrow morning, when we read from the book of Exodus, from Ki Tisa for Chol HaMoed Sukkot, let's think, at least maybe find a little bit of comfort in this idea that it is okay after tragedy to lose faith in God, that God can handle us losing faith, whether it's temporary or just another reason for us to have a hard time wondering where God is in all of this tragedy. Throughout the centuries, the rabbis teach us to learn from Moses. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our rabbi, the rabbi of all rabbis. And they often ask in the beginning of their query why it is that God ultimately chose Moses. And as you'll learn in the Torah portion tomorrow morning, it's for moments such as the moments after the golden calf, because Moses is the exemplary role model, teacher, rabbi, in how it is that we can both have crises of faith and faith at the same time, that they kind of go hand in hand, sort of like love and pain go hand in hand. And the rabbis are curious, why Moses? Why is he the one given the mantle of the leader of the people from slavery to freedom? From all the sources, there isn't a definitive answer to these questions, included in the one that I believe, which is for moments such as the moments after the incident of the golden calf. Rabbi David Wolpe of Sinai Temple in Los Angeles posits the following answer as a possible answer. Why Moses? He says we can only guess that God chose Moses because Moses had an eye for injustice wherever it occurred, whether between Jews and other Jews or whether between Jews and Egyptians. Moses was the one who always intervenes because he cannot stand to see cruelty. He can't stand to witness evil. He can't stand it. He can't stand to see the look on someone's face, the look of somebody who oppresses or is oppressed by someone else. That face that theologian G.K. Chesterton says is the face that stands between us and the fires of hell. That face of power combined with indifference. And that is why, accordingly, Moses is chosen. There is a possibility that Moses is chosen by God because he has pure empathy. I spoke about empathy on Erev Rosh Hashanah, that we could, on Rosh Hashanah morning, that we could all do better to be more empathetic, to have more empathy for others and to have more empaths. But Moses is acutely empathetic for those who suffer. As we learn in the Parsha that we're going to read tomorrow, that the girls are going to chant beautifully tomorrow, that the challenge of leading people out of Sinai, giving miracles like the plagues and the splitting of the Red Sea, and then getting excited to share the words of God with them, only to sense and then go down and be traumatized by their marching around a golden calf. Moses' sense of what is just and what is right never, ever diminishes his love for the people, and in this case, his disappointment as well. On this leadership journey for Moses, his greatest fear of inadequacy, though, become realized in this week's Parsha. I will tell you, it's hard to be a rabbi. It's hard to try or attempt to have authority, to have what's called rabbinic authority. But it is nothing for any rabbi in North America or anywhere else, nothing compared to Moses' plight. The Pharaoh, who is later described as a man with a hardened heart, right, a man who is the embodiment of pure evil, rejects Moses throughout all the plagues until the 10th plague. Moses has to get used to rejection and being persistent. The Pharaoh punishes the slaves. We know about all of these terrible, awful things that he does, but Moses keeps going back. He's persistent. He hates to see suffering. And so he begins the journey, and here he is with the incident of the golden calf, wondering to himself, as the Torah teaches us tomorrow morning, as it says, "Why, God, why have you brought trouble to this people? Is this why you sent me here? Ever since I went to the Pharaoh that first time, these people have been nothing but trouble. And have you not rescued your people at all?" He challenges God to say, why have you set them up for failure? Because these people with this slave mentality, they're never going to get it. And you put me in the lead. Why did you do that? Like us, Moses wants divine intervention. He wants miracles to solve the problems, and he wants evil to be eradicated by signs. He wants those with hardened hearts to just be drowned in the Red Sea. But in the moment when he is having this crossroads, or arriving at this crossroads of fate, faith, and destiny, Moses, in those moments when he says to God, hey, are you going to help me out here or not? And I'm sure many of us this past week, after another mass murder, thought to ourselves, hey, God, are you going to help us out here? Are you going to intervene? And Moses does the same thing. But Moses teaches us what it means to be a leader. True leaders, he learns, as we'll see in the Parsha tomorrow morning, cannot and will not ever wait for divine intervention, but have to see themselves as the interventionist, even when they are reluctant to do so. Moses is a very reluctant and we know humble leader, but he never, ever stops being persistent. From a profound sense in this week's Parsha of fear and failure, Moses decides that the cause itself, deliverance of the people to the promised land, is greater than his own personal feelings and wounds. And so he immediately returns to the people and says to God, don't kill them. Don't destroy them. What point would it make to the Egyptians if they were just to say, oh, look at those people saved and rescued by God. God brought them out to the desert and killed all of them. In other words, it would be bad PR, God. Don't do it. And so he intervenes on behalf of humanity, but he says to God, I cannot do it alone. I can't do it alone. Like Moses confronting his moment of faith, his moment of being at crossroads between where he has been and where he is going, I want to suggest that we too are at a crossroads of this ongoing confrontation in our civilization between good and evil. We are right in the middle of it. We're not the first, and unfortunately, I don't think anytime soon we'll be the last. But we are at that crossroads yet again, between good and evil, fear and hope, and life and death. It is true that what we saw this past week in Las Vegas can only be understood within a larger context of evil that is prevalent in the Western world and moreover in our country. Even in our own community, we confront evil all of the time. I believe that we have, as Americans and as Jews, critical decisions to make as to what we're going to do as individuals and as a country, as Jews, what we're going to do to confront this insidious evil. Are we ready to move beyond the emotional and psychological weight of everything that we see that makes us want to not believe in God anymore or makes us angry at God? Are we willing to move beyond that? And are we prepared to raise ourselves up and remind ourselves that we indeed stand for something? Are we ready to accept, as Americans, as Jews, that there is a cause greater than our individual fears, values that are greater than ourselves? Like many of you, I just was so disgusted with the politicization of the gun control issue in the aftermath. Not that I don't have strong feelings about it, because I do, and not that you don't, because you do. But it was disgusting, and it was harsh, and it didn't do anything for the families who had lost loved ones. What I was, like many of you, warmed by were the stories of the heroes, the courageous ones who fulfilled that greatest of all mitzvot, pikuach hanefesh, who saved the lives of other, remembering not they themselves, but the energy, the spirit of the Talmud when it teaches us whoever kills a life or takes a life, it's as if they've destroyed the world, but whoever saves a life, it's as if they have saved the world. And what saved, I think, a lot of Americans, myself included, from totally losing it this week were the stories of the heroes, the stories of the people who put their lives ahead of others, to take children and women and make sure that they were safe, to make sure that their loved ones were safe before they were safe, and the ones who drove total strangers to the hospital, people they had never met before. Those are the salvific stories from this crisis, not the gun control debate. My question then on this Shabbat is, are we ready to accept our responsibility and our role? Like Moses, are we willing to turn this pain that we are feeling every time this happens into compassion? Are we prepared mentally and physically and spiritually to turn this indifference that we may feel into action and sacrifice? Can we live up to what it is that the heroes taught us this week, what Moses teaches us? That perseverance, that hatred of evil, and that the ability to have the desire to overcome it in any way possible, that is our value. The South African writer Alan Paton tells the story of a man who falls asleep and faces God, who he calls the big judge. And in his dream, the man dies and faces God, who asks him, "Where are your wounds? Where are your scratches and bruises?" And the man says, "I don't have any wounds." The big judge then responds, "Why? Wasn't there anything worth fighting for?" I know we're weary, and I know we're hesitant to take risks with our own lives or the lives of other people. And I know that we are fearful of what's happening around us. But what I'm saying on this Shabbat, during Zman Simchatenu, during the time of our rejoicing, is that I think that we need to become the kind of people and the kind of Jews who understand too well what evil, like we witnessed this last week, can do to a society. It's no different from the evil that we have seen over and over again. And our tradition mandates a system where it is intellectually and spiritually impossible to live in a world where a dream of peace and prosperity, freedom and justice, meaning, safety, hope, and virtue, if we aren't willing to actively engage in it and do something to eliminate the evil itself, and to do it more often than we do, including me and almost everybody I know. On this Shabbat, my prayer for our community and our country, I would end with this prayer, with this idea, with an image that I think we should take into our hearts. It is that image of the heroes, of the courageous, of the people who put themselves not just into the fire line, but who took strangers to the hospital and helped out others who they never, ever had met. On this Shabbat, my prayer is that we are able to do the same. God forbid we should ever be in the line of someone's fire, of course. But can we try during this time to not take for granted the moments that we have to be interventionists, to be like Moses, to be persistent in our acts of love and kindness, to be persistent in the face of evil and hatred in saying, there is hope. The world is not supposed to look like this or feel like this or be like this. To know that we have more questions than answers and be humble enough to say, there is no soundbite good enough. Can we be like the man in his dream? Are we going to be like the man in his dream without wounds? Or are we like those beautiful, brilliant heroes this last week? Are we going to be able to say, yes, there are things worth fighting for, and there are things worth sacrificing for. Hineni, I am here. I am ready to fight evil. Shabbat Shalom. Well, it's